Welcome, everybody. This is an afternoon session here at the Charleston Conference. Our topic this afternoon is preservation of digital collections and dark archives. I'm the moderator for the session. My name is Greg Suprock. I'm from Apex CoVantage. Digital collections and archives require us to be thinking about the environment that they're sitting in as though they're an ecology. It's an ecosystem where there are different players, there are different content holders, there are people that have different stakes involved in the process. And if you think about it from the standpoint of the ecology of digital archives, there are some identifiable habitats that we're all quite familiar with. Libraries, academies, and aggregators are some of the more familiar habitats where content resides. And there's certainly specialization within the different content niches that are present in these different repositories. That specialization means that there are different treatments that may need to be applied when you're considering what to do with the digital repository and how to archive it, ensuring that it's going to be recoverable, ensuring that it's going to be visible for the future. That's led to a process, and people who are familiar with systemic biology are familiar with the concept of coevolution of different types of systems and service providers, organisms that are thriving in that environment. And that's certainly the case for the conversation today. We have a very interesting panel. I'll introduce you to those folks very shortly, in which we're looking at service providers that are serving different segments of the marketplace. They've co-evolved. They're not in competition with one another. They're collaborative ways of being able to approach dealing with digital archives and archiving versions of record to be able to meet the different needs within the community. Key to making sure that we're preserving items that are digital is making sure that we are archiving versions of record, and increasingly because of mandates associated with things like what the federal government has done for any project that's receiving federal monies for research purposes, there's a requirement for making sure that you're archiving supporting information and data, at least to the extent that you're capable of replicating the experiment that has been reported in the version of record. So with that introduction, I'd like to introduce to you our panel. We have 4 speakers. We have 3 folks here in the flesh, and we've got 1 person virtually who's going to be participating. The first of our speakers this afternoon will be Craig Van Dyck. He's the Executive Director for CLOCKSS. The second speaker that we have this afternoon is Jabin White. He's Vice President of Content Management at Portico. The third speaker that we have this afternoon is David Pcolar, who's the CTO for the Digital Preservation Network. And Michelle Paolillo is the Digital Curation Services Lead at Cornell University. She's our virtual speaker this afternoon, and we'll be putting her on through a Skype presentation as we get to that segment. So with that, I'd like to introduce you Craig Van Dyck. He's going to talk about CLOCKSS.
Keep waiting to attend one of these sessions where 2 people trip over each other and one of them falls off the back of the stage. I was thinking maybe this is going to be that first time. But you don't do that. Okay. Thanks for coming to our session. As Greg said, I'm Craig Van Dyck, the head of CLOCKSS. CLOCKSS is an acronym that stands for Controlled Locks, right? So what does locks mean? Locks means lots of copies keep stuff safe. Of course, looking in the audience, I'm not sure how familiar you all are with LOCKSS, for example. It's been around for a while. It comes out of Stanford University. It's a pretty cool technology where the LOCKSS system has something like 150 nodes around the world, and those nodes are constantly checking each other to make sure that the data is valid. CLOCKSS controlled locks means basically that there's a smaller number of servers, which makes the publishers feel better about the security. There's 12 servers, which I'll get into a little bit later. So what do? We ensure the long-term access to scholarly literature for researchers. CLOCKSS is part of a diverse ecosystem of preservation solutions. The people on this panel are all part of that ecosystem, and there are others. What's key is that, this is sort of my take on things, libraries have persuaded publishers that archiving is important. And I want to emphasize the important role that libraries play here. Libraries have a lot of power. Libraries spend $6 billion a year on publishers' content worldwide. So if libraries say to publishers something is important, publishers listen. And archiving is something where publishers have gotten the message and they now, I think, are pretty much on that page. Earlier today we heard something about perpetual access, and I keep thinking libraries could negotiate for that, so I encourage you there. So CLOCKSS works with both libraries and publishers, but we are preserving and archiving the literature on behalf of the libraries and their constituencies, the researchers. We use the open source LOCKSS technology. We have 12 nodes around the world, and all 12 of these nodes have all of our content. You'll see there's 6 there in North America, 3 in Europe, and 3 in Asia Pacific. CLOCKSS has been certified as a trusted digital repository by the Center for Research Libraries, and in the track audit, CLOCKSS got the only, or at least the first, I don't know if anybody's gotten one since, perfect score for technology. Oh, I should look at my paper here in case I made some important notes about what to talk about. So our processes, we get the content from the publishers in 2 different methods. One is file transfer, which means the publisher packages it up and either sends it to us and we go to their site, their FTP server, and pick it up. The point is that the publisher is in control of getting the content to us. The other is web archiving or web harvesting. And of course, Stanford has a strong program in web harvesting. There's a whole department there focused on it. This is sort of where, this is the way LOCKSS works, and so CLOCKSS can take advantage of this method also. And in this method, the CLOCKSS crawler goes to the publisher site and picks up the content. A couple of words about governance. An important principle is that CLOCKSS is a dark archive, meaning that humans are not accessing the content. It's possible for humans to access it, but through the LOCKSS technology, our feeling is that polling mechanism of the different servers chattering back and forth to each other to make sure they all have the same data, and if they don't, the one who's outvoted gets overwritten by one of the others, that validates the bits. When we trigger content for access, and I'll say something more about this later, it is made available open access. We feel that our governance is by the community. There are equal number of libraries and publishers on the board. The funding is from libraries and publishers. We're a freestanding 501c3. We are in a close relationship with Stanford, but it's a freestanding organization. And I'm happy to say financially stable. Just a few statistics. We have 200 publisher participants, 750 library supporters, 15 million journal articles and books, adding about 2 million a year. At least that's the pace we're on right now. Somewhat interesting, our 5 largest publishers account for 70% of the content. However, of our publishers, 65% are quite small, what we call long-tail publishers. If you're not familiar with that term, the idea is that there's a small number of publishers who publish a lot of content and then a very long tail of publishers who publish a small amount of content. And those smaller publishers make up a strong majority of our membership. I want to say a couple of words about the long tail because I think it's important. These long-tail journals are the most at risk of disappearing from the web. They are sometimes a journal run out of an academic library, an academic department in a third world country, for example, and the journal might exist for a while and then stop publishing. And if it hasn't already joined an archive, then that content can be lost. Also, these publishers are hard to find. They may be important to a small number of libraries, but they may be virtually unknown elsewhere. And they're relatively difficult to work with because they don't have robust infrastructure. They're not necessarily tuned into what's happening today in scholarly literature. Here's my ask, well, two asks. One ask for libraries is to tell us, and not only us, other archives have the same ask, what is your priority for what we should archive that is not already archived. In your library, it may be that there are some resources that are really important to you, but they're not very well known elsewhere. And it may be that those resources are not being archived, and if you tell us about it, we can go chasing the publisher of those resources. So I think all archives would appreciate that, helping us to manage our own resources in trying to get at the long tail. I want to say a few words about triggering. We have rigorous practices for the decision to trigger content for access. The bylaws require a 75% board vote in favor of triggering, with no more than 2 votes against a trigger. So far, we have triggered 29 journals, and in this past year, about 1 million articles were downloaded from those 29 journals. I was surprised there was that much usage. I think a couple of those journals probably shouldn't have been orphaned. The publishers probably should have kept publishing them. Running out of time. The triggered journals are open access via CLOCKSS at 2 servers, Stanford University and Edinburgh University. Our priorities in 2017 is investing in hardware and software to continue to increase our capacity and timeliness. We'll be taking on more large backfiles, and we want to strengthen our transparency and outreach. Our holdings are publicly reported in the Keepers Registry. If you're not familiar with this website, I recommend that you go there. I think they have about 12 different archives that they keep track of, and we report to them, and they report out what our holdings are. It's quite handy. Here's our website, here's my email address, and here's my phone number. Thank you.
Thank you, Craig.
Oh, I also brought some flyers, if anybody wants a flyer.
All right. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Jabin White from Portico, and those of you who know me might know how difficult it was for me not to intentionally trip into Craig, and but we'll have some fun. So again, I'm Jabin White. I'm Vice President of Content Management for ITHAKA, which means I handle the production groups for both JSTOR and Portico, and we are here to talk about Portico today. I want to start off by saying I agree with a lot of what Craig said, and in some of the introductory, there's a preservation ecosystem out there that we're all a part of. So, we all have our strengths and weaknesses. So keep that in mind. What we do, Portico is you can read for yourselves. It's digital preservation of e-books, e-journals, and other electronic content. We have a couple of different major services. The e-journal and e-book preservation services are the two. Well, the journal one is the oldest. We added books a few years back, and then the digital collection service was added a few years ago. The difference is in the first two, both publishers and libraries pay to be part of that service. The digital collection, the publishers pay, and there's no library fee. And then in the last couple of years, we've added a national library service where the publishers pay no fee, but the national libraries pay a fee. Some basic stats for what we've done over the years. Portico started in 2006, and you can see the growth in number of titles preserved. We are fast approaching the 25,000 title mark. In terms of articles, that translates to around 60 million articles preserved. For ebooks, we are just north of 600,000 titles. And then some of the participation, global participation, about 900 libraries in 21 countries around the world participate in Portico. And on the publisher side, it is about 400 publishers in 49 countries. Some stats from the last full year we have, 2015. We use a concept called archival units, which is basically a journal article or actually a whole book. There are about 60 million archival units within Portico. And the archive itself has undergone pretty significant growth within the last couple of years. I think we have increased our capacity for taking in journals, and we've also the digital collections that I noted are as you might imagine, pretty large in file size. So when we take one of those in, it's a pretty significant growth for the archive. 66 new publishers joined the service in the calendar year 2015, and bringing the total as of the end of last year to 343 publishers. So, Craig said the librarians have helped pointing out to publishers the importance of Portico, and you can see the effect of that. We need librarians to help tell the publishers to be in a preservation service, and that's obviously been quite effective. Just a real quick highlight on I mentioned the work with our national libraries. We started with the British Library, and we were selected specifically to help them comply with the law in the UK. They passed legislation a couple years back, and they had to have access to titles, and they needed basically Portico's workflow to help them do that. So we've started delivering to the BL, and we now deliver content, journal articles for about 6,600 titles from 18 publishers. It's a little bit of a departure for us, but it was a very good reuse of our core sort of capabilities. And then on top of the British Library, the KB, National Library of the Netherlands, we were talking about doing a similar activity on their part, and that's hopefully coming close in the near future. Lastly, I want to mention the RMAP project. We did as a Alfred Sloan grant in concert with the Data Conservancy out of Johns Hopkins and the IEEE and Portico, the three organizations combined. And we preserve journal articles and books and digital collections, but you all have heard about the growth of data along with journal articles and what happens to them, and worse, what happens to the connectivity between all this great literature out there in the world in journal articles and book chapters and the underlying data. The RMAP project essentially is creating and preserving the links between the data and the literature that cited that data. I'm a little biased. It's an amazing project. It wasn't easy to do. The underlying technology is very difficult, as you might imagine, to sort of keep those connections. But the project was a success. It's out there now. And if you are at all interested in this, I encourage you to go to a poster session tonight at 6:45. Saeed Chowdhury from Data Conservancy is giving a poster session. I think it's at the Marriott, but check your program. It's a poster session at 6:45. And that is my time. Thank you so much. Good.
We're on the third leg of our Blitz sessions.
That's right. No one has fallen off the podium yet, so we're doing very well. Hi, I'm Dave Kohler. I'm the Chief Technical Officer and one of two employees with the Digital Preservation Network, so that kind of puts my title in perspective. A lot of people say, well, can Deepin do X? And I say, well, there's two of us, so let's see what we can get done. And we're willing to put you on a committee to help with that. So what is Deepin? Deepin is a 50-plus member organization that is part of a community. We're interested in large and diverse preservation ecosystems. We are partners with many organizations, including my co-participants here. We don't consider it to be a competitive arena. We all have our niches, we have our collection standards, and are really working with the community, all of you, to figure out how to do long-term digital preservation. So we are a membership organization. We identify and use and extend emerging practices, established practices. We iteratively develop technology to facilitate metadata creation. We're especially interested in rights metadata and actionable rights metadata. That is a real problem for collections in the long term. How do we understand in 20 years or more how we can actually use the content that's in archives, especially dark archives? What happens with orphaned or abandoned collections, and how do we resurface those for the research community? And how does this work throughout the Academy? So our service is a 20-year moving window. When you deposit content into Deepin, you do it with a single membership fee or a price per terabyte, and we cover the preservation services for that content for the next 20 years or longer. Hopefully our financial projections and the cost of storage going down will enable us to retain that content longer. It is a dark archive, so we do not, as with my co-presenters, we don't offer that content up as a searchable archive or have other access to the content. We do leverage, however, through metadata and through periodic fixity checks of the data, the ability to retrieve metadata on your deposited collections. We maintain a distributed registry of those collections. So Deepin really provides content transport and logistics surrounding the data that you're depositing, that our members put in. We have a pretty robust architecture where we have distributed archives that leverage existing repositories at institutions. What that allows us to do is assure that the content is geographically distributed, technologically distributed, and administratively distributed. So we feel that we have no single point of failure in our architecture. So why would you want to deposit with Deepin? If you're a Deepin member, the strength is in the community. Our guidelines are determined by member committees and working groups. We have a joint provision of preservation services, so we work with existing repositories that are also members. We work to advance standards, and you know, I was just having a conversation earlier where we were talking about archives and archives at universities or special collections. And there seems to be still an evolution going on of analog materials and then digital materials, and those are really considered separately. However, we really feel that as we're moving forward and we're using digital facsimiles of the analog records, that we really need to encompass the digital workflow of all records out there, of all content. So Deepin's role in this preservation environment is to adapt as standards change, as technology changes, and really keep that 20-year window alive. So we have a pretty big goal, and we have quite a few members that are working towards that goal. So we have over 50 member institutions that are depositing content. I was just in a meeting before this, and we have 17 members that are actively depositing at this moment. We also have 5 nodes, and our nodes are service providers. They're trusted service providers. So we have AP Trust, we have the HATI Trust, we have the Stanford Digital Repository, the Texas Preservation Node, and the Chronopolis Repository. All of those repositories and collections are moving towards trusted digital repository status or already have it. So we not only have individual service providers that are trusted repositories, but we're also pushing for a trusted digital repository certification across all of Deepin. All of our nodes independently provide those preservation environments, and they act as a distributed preservation federation. So all of our nodes can stand on their own. They can restore your content if need be, but we also have the strength in being able to facilitate large-scale restoration services or metadata mining through coordination of those repositories. So what does Deepin do? Deepin does establish that network of heterogeneous, interoperable, trustworthy, preservation-level dark archives. And we are just in the dark archive realm. We don't try to provide access. We don't, you know, your data is safe in the Deepin architecture. Deepin is adaptive. Okay. We have different architectures at different nodes, and that's a very important concept to us. Our focus is on member needs. As I say, we're adaptive and iterative. We have strong opinions, but we hold them loosely, so we know technology will change, that standards will change, and we're available to do that and to work with our member institutions. We have a number of data flows. We have RESTful architecture, so everything that we do is based on an open API. There's no single point of failure, as I mentioned. We're flexible, scalable, and adaptive, and all of our code is open source. It's available in GitHub. You can see our documentation, you can see our code, you can pull everything down, and you're free to contribute to the project or be a member of Deepin and be involved in the member committees. So we're very excited. Deepin has come online in 2016. We're transitioning from a pilot project and a startup into a production data service, and we welcome your participation in Deepin. Thank you.
Thank you, Dave. And our final presenter this afternoon is Michelle, and I'll show you Michelle here in a minute. Lost my window. There we go. Okay, there's Michelle.
Hello, Charleston.
Very good. I'm going to put up Michelle's presentation, and then as we step through it, Michelle, if you just cue me, I'll change the slides for you, and you
I'll do that.
can have at it.
Are we up?
We're up.
Great. Hello, and I'd like to shift our attention towards a specific matter of curation, which is that the arrangement or organization of collections can convey meaning. And that arrangement is part of a successful deposit into a dark archive. I'll illustrate this by telling the tales of two collections that we deposited into our dark archive at Cornell University Library. Next slide, please. So let me begin by giving some context around Cornell's dark archive. The Cornell University Library Archival Repository, which is also known by its acronym CoVantage. We choose to develop a dark archive to free ourselves from the requirement to develop a delivery interface and focus instead on matters of digital preservation. As this diagram illustrates, CoVantage Pcolar uses the strategy of distributed multiple copies at the core of its design, just as most preservation repositories do. As we make our deposits into the master instance of the repository, they are replicated to tape, which serves as an offline copy, and to a follower instance in the Amazon cloud. The master and follower copies are compared over time to make sure that they are appropriately in sync, and continuous monitoring alerts us as to any unwanted changes in the data. Next slide. The problem of digital preservation is not just a technological one of preserving the fidelity of a digital archive. After all, if some event should happen where we need to draw upon preservation copies, we need to be able to find the set of affected items easily and restore them to delivery systems. Our archive storage architecture gives us three basic building blocks: what we understand to be our digital assets, the documents, images, the stuff we're trying to preserve. Those become resource objects. Descriptions about these files that we want to index and search become metadata objects. And we encode folder structure as aggregate objects to express relationships of resources to each other. The concept of aggregation can be illustrated by a traditional file system where folders group objects that have natural relationships with one another, and where dependencies can be conveyed by nesting folders within one another. As you see in this illustration on the left, you don't have to know anything about the assets of this collection to conclude some basic things from the folder structure alone. There is some expectation of documentation, as noted by this folder named documentation. And the collection's broken out into pure modules that are sequentially numbered, hinting at additions to the collections over time. It's absolutely undisputed that resources and metadata carry meaning, and time spent in creating good metadata is necessary. But my point here is that the arrangement of a collection also conveys meaning, and if leveraged well, it can assist in creating a sense for a collection that can be leveraged later should the restoration become needful. Next slide. My first tale is that of a collection called Digital Commons at ILR. This is a collection of over 28,000 articles hosted by the faculty, or authored by the faculty of the School of Industrial and Labor Relations, and uploaded into a hosted service for delivery. On a quarterly basis, this service makes a compressed extract of the full repository available to us. That extract is arranged exactly as the delivery system, and we deposit its contents into our dark archive as arranged by the vendor. The structure is depicted here in part on the right, and you can see that the groupings and the names of the folders are numbers, and they're obscure and unclear. There are realities that prevent us from rearranging the deposit into something more meaningful to us. Every submitted article has been renamed by the vendor to fulltext.pdf, so nothing but the given structure distinguishes them. Additionally, there's no unique identifiers in the metadata that would allow us to group an article, an original article, and its metadata and the ancillary files in a meaningful way. So we're kind of stuck preserving the structure, even though it's more of a hindrance rather than a help in terms of understanding relationships among the original files. Next slide. So I feel compelled to clearly convey that this deposit leaves me with a feeling of mystery, and not in a good way. Changes in the delivery architecture by the vendor lead to changes in the arrangement of the deposit, and when these changes happen, it makes incremental updates of changed resources difficult to align with the previously deposited versions. The arrangement tells us little or nothing about the assets themselves or their relationship to each other, and consequently the arrangement does not support any restoration of assets beyond reloading them into the same architecture. But what if we sever that vendor relationship? Or what if the vendor is sold to a competitor or goes out of business? Will we be able to restore this data to a different system? That tale's one I hope I never have to write, for it surely will be full of suspense. Next slide. My second tale is the tale of archive.org, a long-standing collection of over 1 million e-prints in a variety of scientific disciplines that has been managed by Cornell since 1999. These articles are submitted by authors directly into the system. When creating a strategy for this collection, we desired to create an arrangement of the deposit that would make sense independent of any specific architecture. Obviously, our transparency into the system that we already manage helps us enormously to accomplish this. As you see in the snapshot on the right, the deposits are first arranged by general groupings, by deposit date, which are named after the year and month of deposit. And within that grouping, we have subgroups relating to the individual preprint submissions that are labeled after their system identifiers. And within those groups, we have the original files in one aggregate, the source folder, and the later normalized version in a peer directory called first processed. The presence of this unique identifier allows us to model the assets in this way and create a structure that is independently intelligible. In fact, the largest challenge that we have in preparing packages for deposit is prioritizing that activity with other development work for archive.org. Next slide. So I have to say, preservation like this feels better. The deposit is organized, stands on its own, arrangement is intelligible, and groupings support overall clarity of how items relate within the collection. The use of unique identifiers allows us to associate resource, metadata, and aggregates in this natural way. Most importantly, we have an increased confidence that the structure can be leveraged to restore the objects to a wide variety of delivery systems. The predictable structure facilitates automation and restoration because the intellectual entities are consistently modeled. So, one last slide. In closing, I'll note the obvious. Arrangement's not everything, and clear arrangement often depends on other factors that I've only alluded to, like unique identifiers and well-populated and consistent metadata. My main points are pretty simple. Technology alone won't solve your problem, that is the problem of preservation, because technology works best where the arrangement of collections is clear and consistent. Successful preservation will acknowledge the possibility that data may be restored. So even dark archives need to grapple with strategies for doing this. Not surprisingly, the more transparency that you have into your source system, the better your chances are to create coherent arrangement for your deposit, and this will enhance your overall success. Lastly, don't underestimate the time it will take to get arrangement right. It can require significant effort, even as it's worth doing. Thank you very much for your engagement, and I look forward to your questions and observations.
Thank you, Michelle. Michelle, I'm going to leave you on screen there so folks can see you while we're doing the Q&A answers. I'm going to throw this open to the audience. Are there any questions that you'd like to ask any of our panelists at this point in time? Sure, come on up. If you'd identify yourself and who you're with, that'd be great.
Sure. My name is Jennifer Bowen. I'm at the University of Rochester. First of all, I just want to thank you all. I really appreciate hearing, one after the other about all the different preservation models. I think, even though I'm familiar with them, it helps to kind of solidify it in my head. So my question then is, since we have some of the foremost experts on dark archives all sitting together, what do you think is next? What's missing? What should be, you each have a different model and they've each worked and they're kind of doing their own kind of, piece of the puzzle. What do you think is next?
I'll point to two things. First, the long tail, as was mentioned. Second, maybe this wasn't mentioned, completeness. The truth is that sometimes little bits go missing, either at the publisher's end or the publisher's site or in our system, rarely. And we all expect completeness. I think as librarians, you are aware that sometimes publishers' online publishing sites can have mysteriously missing content, and we struggle with that as well. If the publisher doesn't know where it is, we're probably not going to know where it is either. So I think there's more to be done on completeness. Metadata is important there. Jabin probably knows more about this particular topic than I do. So maybe I'll hand you.
Well, I was going to have an answer too. we've all talked about, I think we do a decent job in the known kinds of content we have today. And I'm not talking about the long tail here. I'm talking about other forms of content and what that looks like in the future. I think that's what's next. There are a lot of things, potentially a lot of things out there, and I think as humans, we like to put everything into nice, neat buckets, and we classify it as long tail. I consider the long tail to be, actually, I like Craig's definition of it earlier. It's a smaller publisher who publishes a small amount or a small number of journals, or even one journal. I think we're chasing those, and I think we're making progress there. We're making progress in completeness. The other kinds of content in the future thing is, I'm a little embarrassed to say that scares me a little bit, and I think it probably scares all of us. And if we throw that into the same bucket of long tail, I think it's doing it a little bit of a disservice. There's other stuff out there that we don't yet know how we're going to preserve because it hasn't been invented yet. So I think that's one of the big things that's next.
I could follow up on that in looking at this problem from a slightly different perspective. So there's a big movement for open access journals on campuses. So there isn't necessarily a publisher behind that. So how do we connect to those journals? How do we preserve them? How do we look at gray literature? How is that being preserved? What type of metadata do we have surrounding it? Are we using standards behind that? Are we looking at it long term? And what about things that are completely out of the realm of print? Performances, visual art. How are we archiving those? What are we thinking about for long-term preservation of those materials? Would definitely like to work with the community on that. The experts are out there, and that's what we need to move forward on. We need to think about inclusiveness in how we approach dark archives, long-term archives.
Michelle, do you have anything you wanted to add to that?
Yeah, only that the library has, well, the two collections that I presented on are, you could consider them library published collections. And I would say that our practice, even within this one institution, has been somewhat uneven and evolving over the last 10, 15 years. And so I find that the collections are in varying degrees of readiness in terms of preservation, and some of those things, rich metadata, identifiers at the item level, things like that, that's uneven from collection to collection. I think that it's really a question now of practice within the library, of encouraging the best practice and encouraging that preservation is not a thing that you bolt on after you publish a collection. It's really something that you want to think about from the beginning as you're thinking of setting up a repository.
I agree with that. Well, we've approached the end of our time. Well, we can fit in one more question if it's fairly quick. So,
what percentage has been entered into these dark archives? What percentage is not?
I'll need to hear the question again.
The question was about what percentage of materials been incorporated in the dark archives and what percentage has not.
This is Craig. I'm looking at Michelle because Cornell and Columbia did a famous or infamous study about how much of their resources were in archives. And I don't know, Michelle, if you're up to speed on that, but do you want to have first crack at that?
I don't have the numbers ready to my mind, but I will tell you that most of this stuff was not archived. I think it was the vast majority was not.
Yeah, I think that's right, and it gets back to, I think Dave used the phrase gray literature. I mean, a library collects lots of stuff, some of which is digitized on campus. You know, it's not really considered published material, and I'm not an expert on the Pcolar report, but I think the scope was as broad as all of that, and I think we are focusing on what you might call some of us are focusing on the primary literature.
Yeah, I think that there are many unknowns when we take a look at what amount of content is actually being put into dark archives. Deepin considers itself the seed bank for research data for collections. So you may never come to that dark archive, to that tertiary backup. But one of the things that we understand is that long term, as Michelle said, we don't really know how to recover content after the commercial system that it was extracted from is gone, when interpretive references are gone. How do we reassemble collections? And that's a big part of this question, not only of what's being archived, but how well are we archiving?
I think one of the things that this ties back to is a very opening segment where we talked about this being an ecosystem of different types of services, different types of issues and niches. Just like organisms that get to an island that has not been their stomping grounds before, there's an expansion, there's a learning that needs to go on. There are going to be areas in that ecosystem that aren't touched early on. And we're in the early stages of a lot of this, and it's going to continue to evolve as time progresses, as technology changes, and then the requirements continue to change. So I want to thank the speakers. They did an excellent job today, and I would like you all to give them a warm round of applause. Thank you.